Right, a very, very warm welcome this morning, folks, to what I hope will be a very, very fascinating discussion with some people who spent a long time in industry, and we're going to be discussing a few kind of key topics around the kind of built environment, and all of this is as a result of the COP26 meeting / discussion / commitments / non-commitments that have been made over the last kind of couple of weeks. So we'll rattle through the kind of the quick intro for what we're going to be talking about, and then we'll get down to the actual discussion. So we've got, not including myself, we've got 4 kind of key speakers. We've got Kate Brown, who's a sustainable building consultant and uses data to design high-performance buildings. That's probably the simplest way of describing what Kate does. We've got Martin Heath, who comes from an installer background. There's a couple of companies that he's involved with, including the Basingstoke Energy Co-operative and Your Energy, Your Way. So lots of practical experience from Martin on the ground. And then we've got Nick Stickland, representing Stickland Wright Architects, gets involved with all kinds of projects and clients, not least developers, but homeowners as well, and particularly we've all heard of Passive House. They've got the first accredited active house scheme, and they've got a real kind of heavy-hitting firepower in their practice for low energy design. And then last but definitely not least, we've got Rachel, who I've known for a good long while, and is Passive House designer and also past 2035 retrofit coordinator. And again, between us, I should have asked, we've probably got many decades of sustainable design and implementation experience, and it's great to have you guys on the call. But we'll hear a lot more from those guys in a minute. Do keep your mics on mute, usual kind of admin, do keep your mics on mute so everybody gets the best out of the discussion over the coming hour. Any questions you've got, we've got Kat, who's going to be monitoring those questions as we go through the discussion. We'll keep the main part of the discussion tight between the kind of the 6 of us, and then we'll open it up to questions, and we'll get individuals to answer those questions for others on the chat here. We do record every single one of these webinars and discussions for others to benefit from later on. So if you have to dive out, we'll be sharing again on Meshwork and longer term on YouTube. So we'll just whip over this. Meshwork is, as you'll be well aware, is a very, very fast growing community of like-minded individuals who care about sustainable design, being part of a community that cares about sustainable design, and just getting engaged and sharing information, empowering all of us to learn at the very, very rapid rate that is required of all of us to make kind of lasting change. And the membership numbers for the platform are rapidly increasing. Over the last 3 days, we've probably had 30 members join the platform. And so, the chances of us getting to 1,000 members by Christmas is definitely on, which is fantastic, given that we only started in April, and much more to come. So in order for us to get there, do share with people you think it would be relevant for. There's a really clever kind of little invite function if you click on your face, and you can bulk invite a load of people to the platform, and every one extra person that joins makes a small but increasingly more powerful contribution to the diversity of the platform. So I encourage all of you to share with your network what we're doing here. And now I'm just going to quickly hand over to Kate. Having built up a large amount of members on the platform, we're starting to look at offering paid for courses on the platform. Again, understanding that free information is fine, but there's real value in paid for courses having been put together by specialists as well. So Kate, I'm going to give you a quick kind of 20-30 seconds on your course coming up. Just as a quick intro, and this is starting on the 26th of November. So we're in the last kind of however many days, week away from doing that course. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick bit on that, and you can intro it.
Brilliant, thank you, Doug. So this is starting a week on Friday. It's 3 consecutive Friday mornings to become climate literate. So this is in the context of the construction industry, understanding the challenges of climate change and the ecological emergency as well, and how we can make a really positive difference. So if you're frustrated following COP26, or if you're feeling really energised following COP26, and you just really want to know how to make that difference, you want to make a difference, but perhaps you're not exactly sure how to, so come join us for those sessions. Hopefully we'll have a good range of different types of people there. And yes, you should hopefully learn a lot and develop your network of people interested in climate literacy. I am an accredited climate reality leader, which is the Al Gore climate reality training, which I completed a little while ago. So yes, it's I've got all the detail for you. It's a bit scary, and then we talk about hope. So yes, come and join us a week on Friday if you're able to.
Great, thanks, Kate. Yeah, hopefully the first of many. And again, we would actively encourage those who know a lot about their subject area to consider putting courses together. I'm more than happy to chat with you guys about how we can assist that as well. I'm not going to cover the bit on mesh energy. I'm going to kill this because we've got so much to talk about that every 30 seconds is valuable. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We get it back to the people on the call. Yeah, so as a reminder, we've got a number of people here who are running practices, who are sustainability consultants, who are installing equipment, and as best as possible, we've been listening to the discussions over the last kind of couple of weeks in Glasgow around COP26. There's obviously a huge amount that's been talked about, and we could probably argue till the cows come home as to whether what was committed to over the last couple of weeks is enough, whether it was potent enough, whether it was more than people were expecting. But what we're always keen to do, but particularly myself and Mesh, is try and figure out. It's fine dignitaries and world leaders and all sorts of people who are kind of famous in their own right, talking and committing to targets, but the thing that's going to make a difference is actually getting stuff done at ground level, at kind of grassroots level. So, words are one thing, but actually doing something is where the metal meets the road is kind of the most important thing, certainly from my point of view. And so we've got kind of four main questions that we're going to cover over the next kind of 40 minutes or so, and I say then we'll open up to kind of wider questions. And just by way of an overview, the four questions we're going to cover are these. And the first one is, what's your view on the UK's current trajectory to reach net zero by 2050, which is what the UK has signed up to? And what do you think are the potential barriers for the construction industry reaching net zero? So that's the first question we're going to be talking around. The second one is, one of COP26's goals is working together to deliver, as stated. How do you think the construction industry can work together to reduce its impact on the earth? So that's the second question we're going to be covering off. The third one is, what do you think is the most effective way to develop a sustainable design conversation with your clients to enable real positive environmental change? Lots to talk about around question number 3 there. And then the final question 4, if we get time, and we'll try and create time, is what actionable measures are you taking to meet the sustainable design targets in the construction industry? So lots and lots of questions we could ask, but we thought these 3 or 4 are the key ones to trying to help other people on the call and just get a bit more of that discussion going and learning from what each other's doing. So without further ado, the first question, what's your view on the UK's current trajectory to reach net zero by 2050? And what do you think are the potential barriers for the construction industry specifically reaching net zero? So we'll start with, we're going to open up with Rachel Mitchell. So Rachel, if you want to give us your thoughts on those couple of questions, that'd be great.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you for the introduction. I thought I'd start very, very briefly with just some numbers to just remind ourselves what the challenge is. So it's kind of reminding ourselves that buildings emit 23% of all carbon in the UK. That's direct and indirect emissions, and that 77% of that comes from houses, from homes, most of which is space heating. I don't know if anyone's seen, but the Green Building Council launched a roadmap to zero carbon at COP26, which is certainly worth a look at. And their projection is that based on business as usual, and this is the built environment, there megatons of CO2 will drop from about 177 to 115 in 2020. So I think the answer is, what's my view, is it looks like we're not going to hit it by a long way. And my personal view, as someone who works mainly in domestic housing, is that the current policy is around decarbonisation of the grid. That is really the only trick in the book, if you see what I mean. And so it's a decarbonisation of the grid and a move to heat pumps. And there's a lot of problems associated with that. I think the biggest one is that we have a very old building stock, and we've got a lot of existing buildings who need a lot of energy to heat them. We've been doing some work around what that would mean. And our current peak heat load in the UK, which is effectively met by gas, is about 170 gigawatts. And if we translate that directly into heat pumps, that translates to about 75 gigawatts of heat, which is more than double the current grid capacity. So I suppose my view is we have a huge problem of retrofit, which we need to address. And there's very little leadership on that. I think in terms of existing buildings, we know what we need to do. And as a passive house designer, I would say we need to build a passive house. But we just need to get ourselves there a bit quicker than we're doing at the moment. But our existing building stock is hugely problematic. And the amount of energy and change that we need to put into that to meet our zero carbon targets is really it's quite staggering, but also very challenging and interesting. So from my point of view, I think we're not really there, and we have a real problem with our existing buildings. I think the barriers are a real lack of clear leadership and clear trajectory. And also, I think there's very little penalty if we don't meet those standards at the moment. And maybe that's something that needs to change as we become much more aware of the reality of climate change and the impact that it's going to have, not just here, but in the rest of the world.
Okay, yeah, so obviously a good few points there. Martin was busily nodding his head when you were talking about retrofit of buildings, and as an installer, I'm sure you see some of the complexities coming up, Martin, when when you're looking at sustainable technologies. But I mean, what are your views, Martin, on the current trajectory at the moment and some of the biggest challenges facing the construction industry?
Yeah, well, I think following on for Rachel's excellent introduction there. Well, I suppose we can say on the trajectory, at least we're heading in the right direction. Now, we're not going there fast enough by any means, but at least we've started the journey. It's great, as Rachel was saying, that we're going to decarbonise the grid by the mid 2030s, but that's not going to get us anywhere near where we need to get. Particularly in two big areas, heat and transport. And that's the two vital areas now where we're so far behind. I mean, even the Climate Change Committee is saying that we're well behind on the budgets, when we're just not going to get there unless we completely electrify heat and transport, which of course sounds very easy to do, but that does mean far more than the 600,000 heat pumps that the government is talking about per year. That's not going to get us there anywhere near quickly enough. And 600,000 is a tiny percentage of the other 28 million homes that we are going to have to retrofit. But I think the other thing is that we've got to begin to understand the complexities of doing this. And Doug, as you say, we do this almost on a day-to-day basis. This is we've got to start taking a whole building approach. It's not just about shoving in heat pumps. That's not going to work. That's the very last thing we should be doing, really. Fundamentally, we've got to start thinking about insulation and energy efficiency. We say to so many clients now, the very first thing you've got to do is insulate. Once you've done that, do a bit more insulation. And once you've done that, do some even more insulation. But it's not just talking about that sort of thing. You then got to think about the air tightness of buildings. Understand that actually in a lot of buildings now, air drafts and infiltration and air leaks is probably counting for 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50% of the heat losses. And so if we're not thinking about air tightness, we're not getting anywhere near where we need to get to. But making a building airtight is impossible, and indeed it's not even desirable, because we've got to think also about ventilation strategies on top of that. You know, we've got to make sure that we are making sure people can breathe. We can get rid of water vapor. So it's not just about insulation. It's about air tightness, and it's about ventilation strategies. And once we've got those sorted out, well, then, of course, yeah, then start to think about the renewable energy, particularly heat pumps, if we're talking about buildings. But you know, also think about things like MVHR as well. So it's a very complex process, and that probably leads me into some of the barriers. The fundamental one is the set of skills to understand this, and I think, as Nick was saying, we need a lot more building physicists around. We need to really understand how a building works as a system, not just as a series of individual components, because if we're not looking across the piece, looking at all of those different things, we're not going to get there. And there is a considerable lack of skill in that, right the way across the piece, from the engineers that really understand the physics, right the way down to the technicians who understand the details of thermal bridging. And that's not in our industry. And we've got so far to go before we can get anywhere close to bridging that gap. So probably the most fundamental of all barriers is skills. And I think those are probably the biggest areas. I think the other thing we've got to understand in the industry as a whole is we can see how we can decarbonise the operations of buildings by some of those measures I've just talked about, particularly electrification of heat. We've also got to start addressing the challenge of embodied carbon. And I think that's pretty fundamental. If you look at where the life cycle emissions of a building, up to 30% come in the first 2 years. So if we can't deal with embodied emissions, then we're not really going to get to where we want to get to. And just thinking about what that means, if a building emits 30% of its entire emissions in the first 2 years, it means it takes 45 years before operational carbon or emissions are bigger than the embodied emissions. So if we're going to get to a stage where by 2030, 2035, we're getting closer and closer to net zero, we've got to deal with the issue of how much embodied carbon there is going into our new housing stock, not to mention also our existing one. So there's a lot of things I've covered there, and hopefully we can pick up on those a little bit later on. But
definitely, and I wouldn't disagree. I think that the training is a huge one, and you can't. I mean, it's very difficult to wave a magic wand with any of these things, but training of the amount of people that need to advise on these buildings is a big problem. I'll definitely second that, Martin. So, Kate, moving on to you. I mean, what's your view on the trajectory and maybe one or two of the biggest problems that you can see that we've got to tackle?
Yeah, so I'll pick up. I think trajectory has been discussed, and I would agree with what's already been said. I think in terms of barriers, I'll just pick up on what Martin was just saying, which is, yes, we do have to focus a lot more on embodied carbon and making sure our buildings work like they were designed. But what we're lacking, and the real barrier that I see, is the lack of regulation to cause that to actually happen. So I think we know how to build buildings better. I think we know how to reduce embodied operational emissions, certainly, although the regulations are improving in that area, they're not necessarily as good as they could be. What we don't have is regulations around embodied emissions for a new build, what type and how much material we might be putting into a building for retrofit. We're going to have to start retrofitting, so we need to think about at scale. We need to think about what materials we're using for that. Are they the right materials? Is there a whole life benefit to putting these materials into the building? Because at the end of the day, those materials are being used now and they emit their emissions now, just to re-emphasise the point that Martin made. So I think the real barrier to a lot of this is the measurement of the regulations and the requirements to actually reach certain standards. So I think we could probably, as an industry, agree what we think the standards should be to get to some of the levels that Rachel was talking about. We need to reduce the point that Martin made about heat pumps. We need to reduce, and we've just got to reduce everything. And to do that, we have to be made to do that by regulation. So I think the two specific gaps, and I know they're both being campaigned for at the moment, are on embodied carbon and also monitoring building performance in use to make sure that they deliver what they promised. I had an interesting discussion with someone a few months ago on LinkedIn about whether or not buildings are actually compliant on completion if there's a huge performance gap. So they're designed to building regulations and they're not even meeting those standards. So I think there's monitoring buildings in use and being able to say, do they comply only after a year of use, I think that would be something really valuable to help reduce the footprint of the built environment.
Yeah, I'm sure the folks at the Buildings Performance Network would agree with you, Kate.
Yes, definitely. Fiona would definitely agree.
Yeah, exactly, Fiona and her clan. And Nick, how about yourself? Just kind of finish up with you on the potential barriers here.
Well, I think most of us in our work are advising other people in terms of how they should invest their money in terms of improving properties and the like. So we've got to try and get them on board and to steer them. So although we've worked with clients who are very knowledgeable in terms of low energy, quite often you're working with people already converted to the cause, as it were. But we also do a lot of work, bread and butter work, with developer investors. So I thought it'd be quite interesting just to talk about what they're up to and how we can motivate those kind of clients to make change. And I actually have been seeing a change in emphasis from those people. And that's mainly because a lot of the investors they hold and rent, and now a lot of them actually want to get ahead of regulation. So increasingly, they're seeing the way things are going. They're seeing that they're going to have to have a capital expenditure in the future. So if they're doing some work on their buildings now, much better to get ahead of that. But also because in the future, of course, there's still a competitive market. If they can actually prove lower running costs and service charges, then that's a great win for them. So the investors typically want to sort of get a continuity in their yield. That's what they're mainly after. So if they can secure future occupancy, then that offsets the expenditure now. So I think there's a great way in which we can, understanding where we need to get to, that we can inform the developers of the benefits by making that investment now. But there's also some other carrots that we're sort of increasingly seeing coming through, which is that bank funding rates are now being linked to low energy improvements in buildings. So some of the bank funding that the developers rely on, they're actually getting offered lower rates if they can future-proof their buildings against changes that will come in regulation. So, of course, underpinning all of this is the fact that we do need regulatory change. We do need all the things that we've just talked about with the other speakers. So that then, knowing that that's coming in the future, that they can actually invest now to help future-proof against those things. So we're sort of trying to do our bit as well by advising them as much as possible by saying, the incremental changes that are coming towards the future home standard, the fact that they will have to think about whole life of a building in terms of its performance. They will have to think about embodied carbon. And, I imagine actually that embodied carbon will actually become a planning matter at some point, where we'll actually say, that needs to be considered as part of your planning application. So all those things can sort of help drive this through. And it is causing developers that we're working with now to think about existing buildings and think, well, actually, I need to hold that existing building and not actually look to flatten it and move it down. But again, thinking about money and those levers, we really need VAT reform around that as well to also encourage the essential retrofit that's coming. And yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I think that the money does make the world go round. Love it or hate it, money still makes the world go round. And as altruistic as we'd all love to be and be green, this stuff has to be affordable, and the government has to put its hand in its pocket to help move some of this stuff along. Change does cost money, and with regulation and some of these other things that we're talking about, that would definitely help grease the wheels. And I think it was, I can't remember if it was Rachel or Kate that talked about leadership, and certainly from my point of view, one of the biggest barriers is actually the fact that we're looking up to our policymakers to put their money and their actions where their mouth is, and so actually, sadly, one of the biggest barriers just could be proper leadership. and the fear of making a move too soon, or making a move that the population will kick back against. Just being brave enough to do something that is going to move the needle. And if other world leaders did that, then we get to where we've got to. But sadly, some of those things are out of my personal control. But that's a big barrier as far as I see it. So kind of moving swiftly on. Thanks very much for your input on the first question there. So the second one was around the construction industry specifically, and about working together. So what are our thoughts on kind of working together to, kind of reduce? We said there are some pretty big numbers associated with the construction industry and carbon emissions and operational energy and the effect that building houses, building hospitals, building things, repurposing things has. So how do we think we can kind of work better together as professionals? And again, we'll start with Rachel here as to your thoughts, Rachel, in that regard.
Thank you, Doug. Well, I think we do work together. I mean, traditionally as an industry, we work together because we're such a diverse group of people. If you think about how a building project needs to come forward, there's so many people are involved. So by very nature, it's a collaborative process. I think going back to where we were really starting is, and certainly what Kate was saying, is we just need a very clear pathway. I don't think it's about working together more. I think it's about being really clear about where we're going, and that everyone being on board for that's where we need to go. I think the difficulty is, and I don't want to make kind of broad assumptions, but certainly parts of the building industry are very risk averse and they're very cautious, and it's difficult to instigate change within that part of the industry. If, for example, volume house builders have their pattern books and they don't necessarily want to change those because of the cost associated. But I think we've just got to somehow move through that discussion. It's a bit like we've moved through, I think, climate change denial now. No, I don't think anybody really denies that climate change is real. We've now got to move on to, we can't just focus on cost, we have to look at carbon, because if we don't do something radical to reduce our carbon emissions, we can't carry on as we are. I think that's the point we're at now. We have to do something quite bold and radical to change. And I think the other side of that, though, is if we do bold and radical things to change, the benefits are huge. The benefits are better quality houses that are cheaper to run, that have a better, healthier indoor environment, that don't overheat in the summer, that aren't cold in the winter, that people can afford to heat. All of these are hugely good things. So I think we need to focus, rather than focus on the kind of technical difficulties, I think we need to focus much more on how we can produce a much better product. And certainly talking to my clients who tend to be in social housing, if we build better now, and I think Nick, that's the point that Nick's making, we avoid retrofit in the future. So it's about making the investment now, if we know where we've got to go to, so that we just have to do it once and then we don't need to do it again. So I think we just need a very clear pathway. And I think also making I think Kate's made the point, I'm going to make it again, because I think it's a really good one. There needs to be consequences for not complying, to make sure that we actually do start getting where we need to get to.
And what about your thoughts there, Martin, on working together with fellow professionals and colleagues to get things going?
Yeah, you can tell in one of the organisations I'm involved in, Basingstoke Energy Co-operative, it is all about cooperation, and it's something I'm passionate about. But it's interesting, actually, I was thinking about this last night, this particular question. Now, I've worked across quite a few industries now in my career, in telecommunications, media, software, IT, computing, a whole host of other industries. But one thing I do notice, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a factor, is that the construction industry is probably the most disaggregated and transactional of all those industries that I've ever worked in. And that makes it difficult. And that's right the way across the industry, whether you start from top to bottom or left to right, it starts right at the top. Our policies, our regulations, our standards at the top of the value chain, if you like. And the Green Home Grants is perhaps an infamous example of where the industry didn't work cooperatively, where government policy was trying to drive a certain amount of change, but if they only had spoken to the rest of the value chain, they may have understood the Green Home Grants never had a chance of success. So we need to work right the way across as a team. It's not just about the regulators and the policymakers, it's about the architects, the designers, the consultants, the M&E guys, and all the way through to the installers, if you like, at the other end, or the end of the value chain. And it can range from, if we all, particularly, I'm taking an installer's perspective here because that's where I tend to work most, is that if we were involved higher up the chain, talking to the architects and the designers, we could point out stuff that you can't expect a designer to know at detail level. Very good example of just yesterday, we went to install a heat pump only to find the M&E consultants had specified a consumer unit that won't accept the RCDs that a heat pump needs. So just a little thing, but on the other hand, and sometimes we go somewhere and if only we worked right at that front with the architects, we could have made suggestions about how renewable energy or insulation could have been implemented in a different way. So I think if we can work right the way across the piece, and that starts with government and policymakers all the way down to the, if you like, the technicians on sites, to begin to work as cooperatively across this, I think we might get further. How do we do that is another question entirely, and maybe one or two, maybe the others, Nicole, Kate, and Rachel might be able to answer that one. But sure. Here we are.
So Nick, skipping on to you actually. From your kind of architect's perspective here, what's your view on this? You're on mute there, Nick. There you go.
So yeah, I actually a lot of what I want to say really actually echoes a lot of what Martin has just said, and it's to do with improving collaboration. And at the moment, a lot of construction contracts are not really set up in such a way that it encourages that level of collaboration, particularly the traditional contracts. So, I think when the IPCC climate change report asked for systemic change, and I think this is one of those systems that needs to change. We need to change the way in which we procure construction projects. I think there needs to be a golden thread so that there's no disconnect between the designer and the manufacturer, which is exactly what Martin was just talking about. But that requires a much greater front-end investment. And as I say, most construction contracts are just not set up that way. If we've got any chance of hitting any zero carbon targets, we need to deliver real building performance. So, we need to understand how buildings are performing, we need to close all the performance gaps, and we need to link together the manufacturer and the design at the front end. So I think that if you focus on whole life cost and whole life performance of a building, I think that is actually the solution, because at the moment, what that shift will do is it will mean that capital costs will become a poor indicator of value. And at the moment, construction contracts are set up on capital costs. Everyone has to compete under a construction tender to try and get the lowest price. But what they're not looking at is whole life performance. So I think actually a move towards whole life performance and values means that construction contracts then have to adjust to shift to respond, moving away from capital cost as an indicator. So I think there can be new measures of performance. Capital cost will be one, but there'll be quality, user satisfaction, there'll be lifetime costs, there'll be reusability and the associated costs of reusability, there'll be embodied carbon and energy use and emissions. And all of those can be tracked as part of the performance. And then when actual contractors or constructors, together with their design teams as a single entity, actually bid for work, they will trade on how well they've met those performance targets.
Yeah.
And then, clients can actually have, real choice, and they can say, right, well, we're delivering value not on capital costs, we're delivering value long term. And I think that can really drive change. So much greater collaboration is required. I'd like to see companies set up that are design and manufacture.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Yeah, really good point there about, the fact that we need a far more enriched construction methodology and, say, contractually set up. I think what I was thinking about when you were talking there, Nick, was essentially just being able to hold companies accountable rather than just, as I say, the lowest price wins. Coming away from cost and really making team members accountable for what they're doing and the results of that building's design. But I also wrote down transparency. I think some of the ways in which some of the projects that I've come across, our team have come across, it has all been about transparent sharing of information between specialists. Some of the worst projects are where people believe that they know it all, or they don't want to learn from somebody else who's pivotal to maybe another part of the design of the building, or that's how it's perceived, and everybody sits in their silos doing their thing. But being transparent about what people have learned, we're all learning very, very quickly, even those who've been in the industry for a long time. There's a lot more changing that was changing 10 years ago in sustainable building design. So yeah, some fascinating points there. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much. I'm just wary of the time, so we'll rattle on. The third question we were going to cover, and this I think hopefully should chime with a lot of people on the call here, particularly if you've got clients or you've got an idea for a sustainable building and you're trying to, I was going to use the word convince or persuade, but just get others involved in that journey and get them kind of fired up and get them singing from the same song sheet here. So this third question is around, what do you think is the most effective way to develop a sustainable design conversation with your clients, or let's say other stakeholders in the project, to enable real positive environmental change? And again, we'll come right back around to Rachel. So what are your thoughts on, Rachel, with regards to your clients?
Get myself unmuted there. As I said, I work mostly back into social housing, so you're pushing on a little bit of an open door there, especially when you've got people who develop and then retain the ownership of their property. I think the arguments that have been effective there have been investment now to avoid future retrofit, and I think that is considered a real risk. Even as we move towards the future home standards, and I still think there's some debate out there where how quickly we will get there, and I think maybe there's a push to get there much quicker, and maybe to think to focus much more on the fabric element of future homes, because we know that's the only way to go in terms of saving energy and saving carbon. I think there's the argument of relying wholly on grid decarbonisation and moving to heat pumps is so very risky, because of the risks of significant fuel poverty. And we all know that fuel prices are going to go nothing but up. But if we move people, or we try to move people into a technology that is going to cost them more, then we're not going to take people with us. So there's a real need to link that transition with energy demand reduction. It won't work without that. And then I'm sure Martin would tell us about how heat pumps won't work in uninsulated houses anyway, because they can't generate enough heat to keep us warm. So I think there's an argument that I think the discussion about measurement is really, really critical as well. That we are going to move in, I think compliance will, we know that the next uplift of building regs will include some element of quality checking. There's still some debate out there about what that's going to be, but the fact that if we don't build the quality in now, then if our buildings don't perform as we're expecting them to, that's going to have repercussions, and we go back to building now to avoid retrofits in the future. But also, if we build a better quality home now, so if we invest in the fabric of that building, we invest in good quality components in that building has a longer life. it will cost less to maintain. And we will have occupants within it who are living in a healthy home that they can afford to, you know, there are lots and lots of benefits of this, that they can afford to heat. Because if we're pushing people into fuel poverty and people can't afford to heat their homes, then that impacts then on the fabric of the building, as you get moisture coming into the building. So it's I think there's lots of really positive things that you can sell in terms of moving a bit of investment now will save a whole lot of future investment or difficulty in the future.
Great, thanks, Rachel. I'm actually going to jump to Kate because Kate missed out on the last question, so I'm going to jump over to Kate and then jump.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! Thank you, Doug.
So Kate, what are your thoughts on the most effective way to develop a design conversation with clients?
Yeah, so I think there's first of all, I think keeping materials and buildings in use is really important. So this goes to what's been said already about retrofit, the importance of retrofit. We know that, back to some numbers, Rachel did some numbers earlier, I'm going to do some now, 40% of resources, energy and waste are accounted for by buildings, and 80% of the buildings we're going to have by 2050 have already been built. So retrofit is vitally important. So we just need to make people aware of that. So if they're thinking of knocking something down or thinking of building something new, why are we doing that? So I really think that to create positive discussions, education is really important. Sharing this information as broadly as we possibly can, telling people the facts, giving them the knowledge, enabling them. So if our clients are the architects, well, my client would be the architect and their client is the person who will live in the house. Let's just share that knowledge and share that information and understand together how we can make a positive impact. So I think the solutions are available, and we have a moral imperative. I mean, we have it so easy actually in the UK compared to other places around the world. The challenges we face are totally, we can reach these targets if we just make the best effort. I think, and I would have said in the previous question actually about the importance of education. So it's not sustainability in buildings is not taught. They've only just introduced it. Arb have only just introduced it for architecture education. RICS are, trying to put it into their education, but it's going to be 5, 6, 7, 10 years until those people get their qualifications. Now will be.
We've lost Kate for a sec there. Martin, I'll let you pick up on your thoughts there, just to ask Kate sorts herself out.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I wanted to pick up on two things. Something that Rachel mentioned, and it's also Kate. One was about awareness, stroke education, and building on that. And the other one is that there's this growing view, I think, that we just need to decarbonise the grid and everything will be fine. I was talking to, I suppose, a relatively senior politician, not like cabinet member or anything like that, the other day, and he said to me, "Oh, look, all we need to do is, once we've decarbonised the grid, everything will be fine. We can put heat pumps everywhere.
All we need to do is ...
Yeah, and you've got two things here. One is, energy is an expensive and valuable product, regardless. So we had the conversation about insulation, but yeah, it's that lack of awareness that's going to be part of the answer, because clearly it's not. And it's not even going to get us close to the answer. And that's building this sort of awareness within everyone, that this is fundamental. And building on Kate's point as well, retrofit is absolutely vital, because it's even if we could get every single home that we build from now on as carbon neutral or carbon negative or net negative, which I can't see how we're going to do, because we haven't even got a standard that's net zero at the moment, and future standard, home standard, is certainly not net zero. So how do we actually get across this view that we've got to retrofit, not just now for mitigation, which is very important, i.e. how do we reduce carbon emissions from houses, but the other major element I think we've got to start building into is how do we retrofit for adaptation. Regardless of what we think about COP26 and whether it's successful or not, we are heading for a 2-degree or more world now. And I think that's more or less baked in, regardless of what happens over the next year or next 10 years. And we've got to start to design our existing built infrastructure to withstand a very different climate. So mitigation is going to be important. Retrofitting for energy efficiency and renewable energy is going to be important. But how do we start making sure that when we're retrofitting, we are actually making sure that our building is resilient to a very different climate than it was originally designed for? And of course, that's not just our homes. You know, that's every single piece of our built infrastructure or have to go through this sort of retrofitting. So yeah, I mean, there's the sort of level that we need to have these sorts of conversations to get these sorts of points across about awareness and about the answer is not just decarbonising the grid, because I've heard that too many times now. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. And Nick, how about yourself? What are your thoughts here? You're still on mute, Nick.
Done it again. Yeah, I think I'd echo a lot of what everybody else has said, but I think, you know, as designers, we advise our clients. So it's incumbent on us to understand the outcomes of sustainable design, because then we can align those outcomes with our clients' own requirements and quite often their business model, as I was kind of describing earlier. But also picking up on Rachel's point about the positive messages and how you can sell a positive message of making changes now. And I think there's a lot of positivity around the way in which the construction industry will have to change, because instead of relying on what they had in the past and the way that they used to operate, we can say that there's a whole new market sector now because of the way we now need to operate. And I've picked up on the design, manufacture and reuse, and the circular economy, of course, is going to be increasingly important. So somewhere here I have put down some words that I was just looking for. No, I can't find them anyway, but I think that whole reuse side of construction is a whole new sector. It doesn't even exist at the moment. I know that demolition contractors have started to call themselves deconstruction engineers, but it's not really, hasn't quite gone far enough yet. But I think there are an enormous amount of new opportunities, and I don't think we will be able to build in the way that we've built in the past. I think that will be seen as an extravagance, and it will become a sort of a dirty way of doing things, as it should. But the new way of doing things is incredibly positive, and we need to make the steps now so that all those businesses that we work with are gearing up with that mindset, and then all the opportunities will hopefully flow from that.
Interesting. I mean, my kind of two pennies worth on this is fundamentally to try and get clients more engaged. We see particularly positive results just trying to better communicate what needs doing, and it's a difficult conversation to have between not geeking out on numbers, which some of us gravitate to, spreadsheets and percentage reductions and all these kinds of things, and understanding what really matters to that client. And I've talked on many webinars before about the big why. Any Simon Sinek fans will understand kind of the big why. Really getting to the hearts and minds here is, as cold as a particular client might come across, they often have a family, they have their own, they would prefer to have their own, lovely place where they were being the most productive. Everybody is a pretty primitive human being at the end of the day, and trying to join the messaging up together and translate what needs to happen now, and the fact that although we've got to make a big shift, there is a logical and intelligent and easy-ish way of doing that. It might change the process, but I was chuckling when Martin was talking about the politician. I think that the risk that we all run is trying to describe to our clients in that process that it's simple. We just do this, we just buy 5 million trees and for that particular property the problem's solved. Well, that practically that's not very effective. It might tick a few boxes for some net zero carbon, this, that or the other, but practically it means next to nothing, if not nothing at all. Okay, that's great, and it's something with clients particularly and other stakeholders. It's a discussion which all of us will be having more and more. And the next few years, whilst we all get our heads around this, is going to be really, really tough until we become far more comfortable and our clients become more comfortable with that's just the kind of the status quo. That's what you do. You're weird if you build like you were building 5 years ago. I mean, it's just it's not going to go ahead if that's the case. Right, the final question. I've got to make a decision here. We've got one more question, which was talking about actionable measures from the speakers that we've got here today. What I'm going to do, because I'm really keen to get some of the questions answered that have been asked by the people kindly listening in on the call. We're going to make this one super duper quick. So question 4 is about actionable measures that you're actually taking or essentially imminently taking, and I'm talking to the speakers here at the moment. So a quick kind of 30 seconds on what you're doing, and something that's meaningful for you. We're all in different situations. We've all got businesses of different sizes. There's something that's meaningful for you. So Rachel, over to you. A quick bit on that.
Okay, so 2 things. In terms of retrofit, I think we need to let go of, so the work that I do with clients is letting go of trying to achieve EPC ratings because they're based on cost, and what we need to do is achieve energy ratings. Both the London Energy Transformation Initiative, LETI, and the Green Building Council have both agreed that we need to, our existing homes need to have an average of 50 kilowatt hours per metre squared space heating demand. So that's what we work to. But it's working with clients, especially people who own and manage housing, to use their capital programs to bring in, so you're phasing in step-by-step retrofit to achieve a very, very deep retrofit, but you may do it over a number of years, and you link it into capital programs. And that's a really effective way of buying in to get to retrofit. Just making sure what you do now does not affect what you want to do in 10 years' time, and then you program your retrofit well. The other thing I do is, we were talking about education. I am linked to the University of Bath, and every year the University of Bath offers the Passive House Designer course to its alumni very, very affordably. And I think we put 200 or 300 Passive House designers out into the world every year, and that's a very good thing to do.
Great. Wow. Thanks, Rachel. Martin, over to you.
Okay, very quickly. Yeah, I think it's all about living the talk, isn't it? It's it's how do you actually run your own businesses and run your own life. Certainly on a business level, we're trying to do everything we can. We've fully electrified our transport systems now, electric vans, for instance. We make sure we invest in training, particularly getting everyone we work with in understanding building physics across the piece, looking at PAS 2035 registration, that sort of thing. We try and encourage meat-free diets within our building, within our workplace, although that's very difficult actually to achieve, but we can make the point that diet is actually fundamental. If you look at the house, the wall behind me, I'm in my office at my home at the moment. That's gone through a deep retrofit over the last 2 years, just so we could get the energy efficiency of this particular home up to a reasonable standard. Still got a long way to go, by the way, so it's an ongoing project, but it is just living the talk, I think, in both in your personal life and in your business life. I think that's the critical thing that all of us can do, is always challenge when we see people not doing what they say they're going to do, or not doing anything at all, and doing the stuff that we've talked about this morning.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Martin. And Nick, how about yourself?
Well, I sort of worry a bit with the coming surge in retrofit activity, that with retrofit assessors and the ease with which people may become retrofit assessors, that we might end up with a bit of a skills gap, where there might be some individuals who don't fully understand the building physics, and therefore we might end up with solutions that aren't quite right, and that's helpful to no one. So we've seen an opportunity as architects who understand a little bit about building physics to sort of step up our training and our knowledge, so that we can hopefully sit in that place where we can give good advice. So I think it's a good opportunity for us, but also it's moving us in the direction as a business that we want to go as well.
Great. Kate, did you want to pitch in with the last bit?
I just like the flag again for education, and I think Rachel also mentioned it in this question. I think in terms of what I do actionably, because I'm a consultant, is I talk to people, I inform them, I give them the numbers that prove how things can be better, and I think just sharing that knowledge and sharing that information and challenging the status quo as much as possible. I'm involved in the LETI project at the moment on whole life carbon and the measurement of operational emissions, because they're always modelled. So yeah, I think we've just got to carry on talking to people. So that's in terms of actionable measures. That's what I do. I just
sure.
Spread the word.
Great. Okay, folks. Thanks very much. That's been hugely insightful. Far too short a time to talk about all the things we'd like to talk about. So who knows? We might do some more of these. But I think we can all appreciate there is a huge amount of food for thought, and this is seriously this is all about action in our own personal lives, in the lives of our sub teams that we're working in, the companies that we're part of, and the communities and the professionals that we interact with, and all of us will do different things. But the fact that all of you guys are prepared to listen to that and having come through an educational platform which encourages collaboration and sharing of knowledge is one which is far reaching. And I would say personally, education for me and Mesh Energy is one of the biggest assets that we've got. We've got well over 100 years worth of experience as a business, and there's so many people out there who can help in their own small way just by sharing what they know, and moving sort of closer towards the line. So Kat, as far as are there any kind of standout questions that have come up that are worth mentioning as the minutes?
Yes, so we had one, we answered Richard's, but I think we had one from Laura. Are the green loans regulated? Because I heard about some of them and they are only based on EPC ratings, which is not enough.
Good question. Martin, have you got a view on the green loans? We're obviously talking about the the failed green heat schemes, various schemes, but have you got a
I think if it was Laura's question was about the Green Homes Grant, yeah, I mean there's two elements of that. That was a scheme doomed to failure. But on the other point, I absolutely agree. EPCs are not the right way to do this. And I think it builds on Nick's point. They're nowhere near strong enough and evidence-based enough to really be very useful in terms of what to do with a house. It's a good indicator, but that's all it is. But I'm sure others might be able to answer this question in more detail.
Yeah, go on, Kate.
I don't know the answer to the question, but I wanted to raise that recently I've taken some extra mortgage borrowing on my house, my lender, under a scheme that they have, which they offer a lower rate of interest for us to do home upgrades. And we applied for the extra lending on that basis.
So who was the lender there, Kate?
Nationwide.
Oh, Nationwide, okay.
Although we already had a mortgage with them, and this was an extra bit of borrowing. And the mortgage application process was arduous because we had to go through so many interviews and whatever to borrow the money, but they never once asked us what it was for. They just assumed that when we'd applied online. So I think in terms of regulation for green lending, I'm not exactly sure whether that regulation is there. Yeah.
Regulation takes assessment, doesn't it? Fundamentally, if you can't rely on government documentation like an EPC, you're going to need, a qualified assessor that, is honest to be able to give that feedback. And that comes back to the training issue that you were talking about, Martin. It just is a massive dearth of people who can actually get out to where they need to get out to in the numbers that they need to be there. Go on, Nick.
Well, I was looking into Green Deal grants, and I saw that the first, I went through a government website actually, and I saw that the first step was that you need an assessment. So I thought, okay, I'll put in my postcode and see where the local assessor was. And the nearest local assessor to me was Ayrshire. So, okay, that was quite telling. So,
sorry, Nick, just for everybody's benefit, how far is that away from where you are?
Yeah, so I'm in Brighton.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so clearly there's a lot of work that needs to go on there in terms of gearing up assessments around loans.
Yeah. Kat, any others that stand out for you question-wise?
I think that is all of them.
There's lots of kind of mini conversations going on in the chat thing, but I think people are answering other people's questions. So by way of kind of wrapping this up, then I'll take that as a no, Kat. So by way of kind of wrapping this up, just as a last statement for, you know, for, as I say, from the speakers today, what is your, let's kind of focus this. So for the construction industry, what is the, let's say let's end on a positive note. What's the biggest positive out of what you've heard over the last few weeks and what you know of the industry at the moment? What is the, in a single sentence, what's the kind of the biggest positive that kind of fires you up and you know, encourages you that significant progress can be made? So again, we're going to start with Rachel and literally just try and, if you can, Rachel, try and keep it to a sentence. What's the big standout thing for you that gives you hope? Let's say that.
I became a passive house designer over 10 years ago, and I was told it was going to be completely niche and no one would ever take it up. And the thing that gives me hope is that I see passive house now becoming a mainstream energy standard. So that I'm going to sell passive house very briefly. So we have a very low energy standard that we know works, that delivers quality housing, and more local authorities and actually government are much more interested in moving there. So we've made huge steps in the last 10 years in terms of how we view the possibility of building good quality low energy housing. Martin.
Yeah, well, I think the most positive thing is we're having conversations like this. You know, 5 years ago wouldn't have been mentioned, but the fact that there's now a body of people in the industry who are deeply passionate about sustainability and making the industry better is, I think, the most positive thing, and you know, encourage it to me, keeps me going.
Great, Kate.
I think so. I changed career and I used to be a brand marketer in FMCG, and I think what's changed and why I'm really positive is I think people who live in houses are starting to see that there's a better way, and when consumers start to demand change, that's when change will start to happen. So I think, you know, it's there, it's out there, you know, there's conversations being had by not just people who care about sustainability, but by people in general. Passive house gets mentioned absolutely everywhere now. It's any program about homes, there's always a passive house. So yeah, I'm really hopeful in that respect.
Nick.
Well, just while we're talking about passive house, I would also like to sell active house. I think it's quite a good standard as well. It's quite interesting for those who want to look into that. But in terms of hope, you know, I mentioned earlier, we're talking to developer investors, and they're saying that they want to be ahead of the curve. They want change. That's very hopeful for me. So I think there is a broad willingness for an appetite for change. So we just got to find the ways in which people can make that change.
Right. And it mirrors, I think, a lot of what Kate and Martin were saying there, and touches on what Nick was saying. The thing that gives me the most amount of hope is that now it's not hundreds of people that care about you know, energy performance of the built environment. It's not thousands, it's not hundreds of thousands, it's not even millions. It is, you know, billions of people, from politicians to institutional investors to homeowners to, you know, everybody else, that people realize that it matters personally to them, and that change needs to happen. And once it's that deeply ingrained, you know, things will never ever stay the same. And we'll definitely move in the right direction. So let's end on that positive note. I think a huge amount to be hopeful, before we can all play a part. Let's keep learning. And on that note, I'll leave you to the rest of your education-filled, low energy, low carbon days, and look forward to seeing you again on another one of our webinars. So take care, folks. Thanks very much for your time, and see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.